Despite lukewarm reviews, the 1976 King Kong was a big financial hit for Paramount Pictures, and yet a sequel didn't end up seeing the light of day until a decade later, this time distributed by Dino De Laurentiis himself via his production company, the De Laurentiis Entertainment Group. Naturally, with so much time between films, few of the same creative forces returned, save for the director John Guillermin and special effects artist Carlo Rambaldi, and so the aptly titled King Kong Lives came and went with little fanfare, becoming the black sheep of the franchise that would bench the famous giant ape for another 20 years.
Ain't that a natural fact?
How about a little something to wet your whistle, huh?
10 years have passed since Kong was shot down from the World Trade Center, and in a desperate attempt to save his life, he has been kept on life support under the surveillance of Dr. Amy Franklin, and is currently awaiting a heart transplant. Luckily for him, a female Kong is discovered in the wilds of Borneo by adventurer Hank Mitchell, whose blood proves invaluable in making the operation a success. Things quickly turn complicated, however, when the two Kongs escape into the wild together, forcing the US Army to hunt them down. The female is captured alive, but Kong proves more elusive, and his bodies begin to pile up. Amy and Hank must work together to unite the two Kongs before this rare and special species is made extinct by the trigger-happy military. King Kong Lives has the reputation of being the worst of the Kong films, and at face value for good reason. Much like Son of Kong was to the original, this film is an explicit cash grab sequel to the '76 film, only 10 years too late. It is cheaper, duller, and sillier, and steeped in even more uncomfortable romance, this time of the gorilla kind. And yet there is an undeniable B-movie charm to the film, which doesn't take itself seriously at all. And when the focus is purely on Kong and not the rather bland human characters that make up the cast, it can actually be quite a bit of forgettable fun, the kind you turn on for some pleasant background noise while focusing on something else. Once again, like its predecessor, the best thing about King Kong Lives is Kong, or in this case, both Kongs. For the first and only time in the franchise, Kong gets a love interest more appropriate of his stature, and the relationship between him and Lady Kong is the driving force of the story. Much of the runtime is dedicated to this romance, which is undeniably silly, but has its charms. Thankfully, there is also a decent amount of good old-fashioned monster carnage to balance it out, with plenty of scenes of Kong making mincemeat of any pesky humans who dare to stand in the way between him and his lady love. These scenes are legitimately campy and fun, though how much you're willing to sit through the rest of the film to get to them depends on how much of it you can stomach. Conversely, the worst thing about King Kong Lives is that it's just kind of boring. The movie feels like it's almost over about halfway through, leaving you to wonder what the next half hour could possibly entail, which it turns out isn't much. There's a small subplot involving wacky redneck hunters that, while fun, is clearly meant to fill time. There's even an extended heart transplant at the beginning that feels completely unnecessary and may make some more sensitive audiences a tad queasy. Basically, this is a film where very little happens over a long period of time, making its 100-minute long runtime feel twice that. As far as the human cast is concerned, there are really only two major players, Dr. Amy Franklin, played by Linda Hamilton, and Hank Mitchell, played by Brian Kerwin, and both do an admirable job with what they're given. Their romance, which is paralleled with that of the Kongs, is actually pretty believable and develops in an organic way, making for a fairly sympathetic point of view through which to view the story. Aside from them, though, there isn't much here, except for maybe John Astin's Lieutenant Colonel Archie Nevitt, who verges on being an over-the-top caricature, but doesn't quite get there, making him more boring than he ought to be. The special effects of King Kong Lives actually hold up quite well despite the smaller budget. Suitmation is once again used to bring both Kongs to life, and while not quite as good as the first film, the level of expressiveness and characterization brought to the creatures is still really impressive. Still, there are some dopey looking moments here and there, but they are surprisingly few and far between. The main theme by composer John Scott is also very good, reflecting the over-the-top cheesy romanticism that defines the film. The whole production is just really solid on all fronts, which is shocking considering the film's reputation for being utter schlock. This of course doesn't mean that King Kong Lives isn't precisely that. The film is undeniably a low point for the character, if only because it doesn't attempt to really push any new ground. Aside from the introduction of a female Kong, which allows them to switch around the gender dynamics a bit, the film is just more of the same. Kong running around causing a bit of mayhem and destruction. And for that there is fun to be had, especially if that sort of thing entertains you. But if it doesn't, then the film will likely bore you to tears. It's not a total failure as you may have been led to believe, but unless the idea of watching two giant apes flirt and cause a little destruction sounds like a good time, it may be wise to skip this one. For more reviews and opinions on all things King Kong, subscribe and stay tuned to Up From the Depths.